the TV with Mrs. Holtz here now? Okay. So, Mr. Den, when you're ready, we're ready. Excuse me. Pursuant to the Virginia State Health Commissioner's Order of Public Health Emergency statewide requirement to wear masks in K-12 schools, issued August 12th of this year, and the Virginia Acts of Assembly, number 1303, Chapter 456, and the CDC's guidance for schools, and the school board's reopening plan adopted August 10th, 2021, it is determined limited public seating due to physical distancing mitigation strategies will be made available on a first-come, first-served basis, beginning with this workshop. Members of the public will be able to observe the school board meeting through live streaming on bbschools.com, broadcast on VBTV Channel 47, and on Zoom through the link provided online. Citizens, and with that, the workshop is commenced at 4:15 p.m., and we will begin with we'll first ask Madam Clerk to please take the roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Present in school board chambers is Chairwoman Rye, Miss Manning, Miss Anderson, Miss Holtz, Miss Felton, and Miss Hughes. Presently attending via Zoom is Miss Owens, Miss Franklin, and Miss Melnick.
Miss Owens, are you with us?
I am.
Would you kindly state for the record your location and reason for absence?
Sure. I'm in.
Thank you. And I've been asked to mention that Mrs. Melnick is not present today due to a family medical emergency, and Mrs. Riggs. Oh, thank you. Forgive me, folks. For our three remaining Zoom colleagues, Mrs. Melnick is Zooming in due to a family medical matter. Mrs. Riggs is Zooming in due to a family medical emergency. And Mrs. Franklin is also Zooming in for medical reasons. So with that, administrative matters, does anybody, I will open it up for any updates. Mrs. Manning, beginning with Mrs. Manning.
Yeah, so I just had, obviously we've all been having some problems, I think, or I know I have, and a number of other people have expressed problems with our Google Groups email and receiving important messages. For example, I didn't know about the joint meeting with City Council. And I know I didn't receive an email from Miss Linetti. That was pretty important as well, and she followed up to make sure we got it. But I would just like to ask if there are any time-sensitive messages that need to come to us, if you could follow up with us to make sure that we receive them, put a read receipt on the email or something like that until we know. I know Mr. Den sent a message that he's trying to get that fixed. But this is important information that we need to know about, if you can make sure that we get it.
That's very fair. Thank you. Okay, committees, anybody? I'm sorry, not committees, we're not at that point, but anything under admin matters. Yes, Mrs. Hughes.
Okay, I got it. I'm not used to using this one. We're seeing some responses to constituents that state you don't have children in our school system, things like that. I think it's important that the public knows. It gives the impression that maybe board members are pulling student records, that sort of thing, to check on that, which we all know would be completely inappropriate. Is that happening? And if not, can we not give the impression that we're doing that? That's really problematic.
So you're speaking to the collective board. I do want to state for the record that nothing like that has come out of the chair's
It has not come
correspondence.
from you, that's true. But I think obviously it would be inappropriate to pull student records, and we're not doing that. And so I don't think that we should be giving people that impression.
Anybody else, colleagues? I'll just mention that I was remiss last time not mentioning the Teacher of the Year dinner, and so it really was special. It was a hybrid option, but that, I just wanted to acknowledge that and all the staff who worked to make that event a success. And four of us did attend the VSBA conference last week in Williamsburg, and we'll be posting online summaries of some of our sessions. Okay. So that brings us to the first presentation of the evening. And our Quality Measures Equity Report. And I guess Dr. Parrott will do the introduction.
Good evening, Chairwoman Rye, Vice Chair Milnick, school board members, Dr. Spence, and the viewing public. In Section C of Educational Equity Policy 5-4, this school board agreed to support the superintendent and to assess and identify inequitable practices and procedures within the school division that have historically and or currently result in inequities of opportunity for students and for staff. To accomplish this, we contracted with Quality Measures LLC, QM, to conduct a division-wide equity assessment to analyze our equity priorities for the development of a multi-year equity plan. I'm joined this evening by CEO and lead evaluator, Dr. Gwen Lee Thomas of Quality Measures LLC. Dr. Gwen Lee Thomas will provide the board a summary of the equity assessment and recommendations that are outlined in Equity Assessment Report submitted to the division. I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Gwen Lee Thomas of Quality Measures LLC to the podium.
Thank you, Dr. Parrott. Thank you all for allowing me to be here to share the results from the equity assessment that we covered this year. I think you're going to find it extremely interesting and supportive of a lot of work that you've already done in this area. I also want to say before I get started with the presentation that I'm going to give you an overview, a summary of the findings, a summary of the process, and an overview of the recommendations. If you want more detail, that is provided in the report. So you do have that information. Starting with the timeline. As you know, we began this process with a kickoff meeting with the senior leaders in the Virginia Beach City Public School System. So we had a kickoff meeting in January, and in that meeting, we shared with them the process that we were going to use, and we also asked them to give us responses to two questions. And the first question was, given your role and responsibilities at VBCPS, what does equity look like in your work? And we had them to get together in groups, and they shared us what that would look like, because that gave us an opportunity to see what equity would look like across the entire division. The second question we asked was, what equity-related experiences would you like to learn more about from the groups you have been assigned? We were given a list of groups that were identified as a result of some of the data that you have already seen on a regular basis, and we expanded that group and expounded on that group as a part of that experience. So from February until May, we invited people to participate in the focus groups and interviews. We conducted a random sample for teachers and families, and as a part of that random sample, we invited them to participate. We conducted the focus groups with the stakeholders, and then we did a document analysis with 67 documents that we obtained from Virginia Beach, as well as information from the website to help us better understand some of the things that we were hearing. Then because we wanted to get more feedback, Dr. Spence and Dr. Parrott suggested that we take the findings on tour. So we just summarized the findings as they were without doing an analysis to interpret meaning. And we shared those we had webinars all 12 high schools with their matriculating schools. In addition to that, we recorded the webinar and placed it on the website and invited people to participate in that. So in the month of June, that's when we did the tour of findings and gathered more feedback from people. In July, that's when we conducted all of the analysis. We shared with you the summary of findings that we took on tour. And then from August to October is when we worked on the report and the recommendations. And here we are today to share with you what we have found. To ensure that we had a shared language about what we were doing, we looked at the equity assessment definition that was provided by equityliteracy.org. So it means primarily, it's sometimes called an equity audit, but it means primarily to collect and analyze information through multiple data gathering processes to determine the extent to which a school is equitable to each member of its community. So we were using this definition because that's why we wanted to make sure we covered the entire division, the school board, the central office staff, the building level principals, assistant principals, counselors, and so forth and so on, and then the students, the families, and external stakeholders. What we found from the literature and from a high-level review of the information and the work that has already been done is that Virginia Beach is off to a great start with the equity assessment. And we decided that based on what we found, which was number one, the core values of Virginia Beach. We also looked at the Compass to 2025 strategic framework, which is student-centered for student success. The Educational Equity Policy 5-4, which is very comprehensive in talking about what is equity and what you're committed to doing. And then we looked at that Virginia Beach also had an Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And these are high-level activities that must be agreed upon across leadership in order for equity to be pursued later on. Also, to make sure that we were using the same language, we started with the Equity Assessment Policy 5-4 language about what is it, how do we define it. And educational equity fosters a barrier-free environment whereby all students, regardless of race, color, religion, national origin, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, pregnancy, childbirth, or related medical conditions, age, marital status, disability, or genetic information, have the opportunity to benefit from the establishment of high standards and the provision of access, support, effective and inclusive learning environments, and resources required for high-quality education. So this was pulled directly from the policy to ensure that we were using the same language and expectations that you have designed for the division. We found, as I mentioned earlier, that high-level review of those 4 items that demonstrated a commitment to equity. We also looked a little deeper and went to the next level to look at the core values, to look at the statements that are out there. So core values are to put students first, seek growth, be open to change, do great work together, and value differences. The policy, of course, this particular quote says the school board and the school division are committed to developing a capacity for cultural competence and a commitment to equity and inclusion to enable the fulfillment of its core values and lifelong learning competencies. And of course, this, in addition to that, your strategic action agenda for this recent year has the pandemic amplified pre-existing inequities, such as racial, economic, and differing abilities. It highlighted the importance of engaging in unified efforts to overcome challenges. Advancing equity requires a shared language and collective commitment to identifying and addressing barriers. And one of the reasons I wanted to point this out, because we know that the pandemic is recent. It was in the last 2 years. And this statement was already out there as a way to say, we recognize that the pandemic raised these issues and we're willing to identify them and do something about them. So in looking at who was invited to participate, we had 3 areas, the leadership interviews, the school board, the superintendent, and the senior staff in central office. We also conducted focus groups with 6 groups. The Community and Family Engagement, Department of School Leadership, Department of Teaching and Learning, Central Office Executive Directors, the Department of Teaching and Learning Directors, Title I Family Engagement Specialists, Human Resource Specialists as well. At the building level, we were able to have conversations with 35 groups who we invited to participate, principals at all 3 levels, the academy coordinators, center directors, assistant principals at all 3 levels, counselors at all 3 levels, teachers at all 3 levels, the teacher forum at all 3 levels, security assistants, students at all 3 levels, student clubs, and superintendent student advisory board. So we invited all of these individuals to participate in the focus groups and interviews. And we invited external stakeholders as well to participate in focus group. Families, all 3 levels, the African American Leadership Roundtable, Equity Council, Filipino American National Historical Society, Gifted Advisory Board, Minority Business Council, Human Rights Commission, former Virginia Beach employees, Special Education Advisory Council, and the Virginia Beach PTA members. So all of these individuals were invited to participate. To provide you with a little more information about how we used our sources to shape the recommendations. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, we started with the Virginia Beach Educational Equity Policy 5-4. And we used the policy to align it with the Compass to 2025 strategic framework. And that gave us a more laser view about how to approach the equity assessment because we took what had already been accomplished and we aligned those 2 together. And then we looked at the Navigating Ed Equity Virginia Equity Audit Tool and aligned it also with the policy and the Compass to 2025. And so what that provided for us were our approach to gathering the data. The first type of data we gathered were primary data. And primary data means we went out and collected this data specifically for this project. And we were able to invite 2,988 people to participate, and we heard from 366. The second data source is what we call secondary data. And secondary data were the document analysis, where we looked at 67 different documents across Virginia Beach that were supplied to us by the division, and we were able to look at those documents to help expand and expound upon the conversations we had with others from the focus groups. It's important to remember that the focus group data and the interview data were gathered to find out what people were experiencing. However, we don't want to think that the secondary data validated the experience. The experience stand on their merit, their own merit. Your experience is your experience. So we did that, but we wanted to be able to expound on that to create the recommendations. So with the tour of findings, we invited 169 individuals for the tour of findings, 1,192 registered for the 12 webinars, 278 participated in the 12 webinars, and 137 responded to a webinar survey. Our webinar survey basically asked 3 questions. The first one was, were the findings that you saw similar to or different from your experiences? And then people were able to provide us feedback on that. The second question we asked them was there anything missing from the information that you believe is important to ensuring that all students are successful in Virginia Beach? So we gathered that information. And the third and final question was to ask people their affiliation with Virginia Beach. So we ended up with 137 responses from the tour of findings. When Dr. Parrott placed the recorded version on the website, we had 342 people who reviewed it, and of those 342, 47 gave us more responses. So the 366 that we had originally and with the 184 added, we had 550 responses to the equity assessment. Of the 550, here's a breakdown of their representation. So we see that 23% were building administrators, 19% were teachers, also 15% were parents, 10% were students, and 8% were external groups. 15% were Virginia Beach leadership. So this gives you an idea of how diverse our group was in their representation of the findings that we have. Finally, I want to share with you what we call triangulation. We use the triangulation data sources as a way to formulate the recommendations. So what triangulation does is support the findings across different data strategies. So the interviews provide one data source, the document analysis provide another data source, and the tour findings feedback provided another data source. So we were able to triangulate those things in order to be able to make the recommendations that we have, which are 14 recommendations from the equity assessment. Beginning with, so now what I'm going to do is share the recommendations that we have for each, that we created as a result of the findings. They are also operationalized or grouped by goal. So since that's where we started, that's where you're measuring your progress, we said, okay, well, let's see how what was said, what we found in the documents, what was said in the tour findings aligns with the goals that are already out. So starting with goal 1, educational excellence, and you can see the goal here. I won't read that. But I would like to read the equity emphasis, which is identify and address inequities and achievement outcomes by investigating and implementing best practices and seeking innovation solutions. So there was one recommendation under this goal, and that recommendation is to continue to make addressing inequities in achievement outcomes a priority at the division and school level by systematically identifying root causes, collaboratively implementing solutions, and closely monitoring outcomes. So we provided considerations for each of the recommendations. In other words, to provide some additional insight into how this recommendation may be implemented or what components of it we'd like to share a little bit more about. And so the consideration for this one was identify what contributes to achievement gaps and inequities. Closely monitor the achievement outcomes to determine if there are changes in equitable outcomes. And continue to do this review at the division and the building level. One of the things we found with this particular one is Virginia Beach does a great job of tracking achievement. They know who's doing well in what schools and at what grade levels, and those data are disaggregated by race, gender, economically disadvantaged, also student with disabilities. So that is out there. But one of the things we're seeing is that there needs to be more intersectionalities of those identities. So if we say African American males have a high this or a low that, and Asian females have a high low or high that, are we putting those together so that the cross-reference between race and gender, economically disadvantaged and gender, student with disabilities and gender, are those intersections being observed? And so we believe that for equity to occur, you have to be able to look at it another level down. And looking at it another level down means looking at what's happening to the groups with their intersectionalities of identities. Compass to 2025 goal number 2, student well-being. And you can see that one here. The equity emphasis for this one is engage in culturally responsive practices division-wide. Identify and address inequities in discipline practices by investigating and implementing best practices and seeking innovative solutions. For this one, we had 3 recommendations. The first one is to collaborate with students and teachers to determine how America's historical realities can be taught with a holistic view of all groups with their strengths and challenges, and ensure that historically marginalized groups are not consistently depicted in negative ways. So the consideration for this one is to do another, continue to review the instructional tools and artifacts that are used. Also support teachers in the classrooms to address both age and content appropriate ways in which challenging topics, including assumptions about racism, genderism, ableism, and LGBTQ plus experiences, kind of are shaped and understood through a historical lens. Finally, support teachers in understanding the fluidity of their authentic lived experiences of students when compared to resources adopted. We found that in some of our interviews, teachers were struggling with that disconnect between having adopted materials to share and then students responding saying, this is not how things are for us. And so how do they navigate that? So continue to do the culturally responsive practices that are going on, but notice that these things are also coming about for teachers. Recommendation 3, continue to collect and share discipline data, disaggregate by grade level, race, ethnicity, gender, economically disadvantaged, and students with disabilities. So as I mentioned earlier, Virginia Beach does a great job of doing this already. The data are disaggregated by these demographics, but there doesn't seem to be, and we didn't find them, it doesn't mean they don't exist, we just didn't find them, that there aren't a set of metrics for improvement. So you can look at data from last year, data from last 5 years, data for today, and make some inferences. But to actually track those metrics of improvement, what is it we want to see? We want to see lower referral rates, or we want to see fewer suspension rates, or whatever it is. Those metrics were not identified and they were not available. So provide clarity around expectations for accountability and then implement that consistently across all levels. Some of the conversations we had with teachers indicated that even if there are accountability measures, they're not implemented consistently across the division. So also to continue to engage in positive behavioral intervention and supports the PBIS process. We found that teachers found this to be very helpful, and where some teachers would automatically refer a student, they started to think more carefully about what else can I do before I refer this student. So we saw some of that in the findings. And recommendation 4, follow through with the commitment to post the equity policy statement on each school's website. This is in section E1 of the policy 5-4, and we at the time of this report and this presentation that we prepared, we had not seen that on the school. So we believe that because your espoused values are articulated in a way that you're willing to share with the public, if it's in the policy, then it's something that really needs to be followed through to realize, to ensure that people recognize your equity efforts. Compass to 2025 Goal 3, student ownership of learning. The equity emphasis here is identify and address inequities in learning opportunities for students by investigating and implementing best practices and seeking innovative solutions. For this one, we have recommendation 5, which is to challenge teachers, families, and students' assumptions and beliefs that increasing diversity in rigorous coursework means lowering standards and their assumptions and beliefs about which students can learn. Also address how those assumptions are linked to the way students are prepared for college and careers. So provide professional development for teachers so that they can understand how their referrals for the gifted programs and the AP programs and the application process and enrollment in the academies and the CTE programs, how those might be influenced, how they see students may be influenced by how they refer students. The belief is that we want all teachers to say that they see all students through their academic achievements, but the data did not show that from the conversations with individuals. That we had students indicated that teachers seem to think that they need to get up close and talk loudly to the minority students, and they don't do the same thing to white students. But at the same time, we had teachers indicate that some African American students are not sanctioned for their dress code violations because it's considered a cultural thing. So that disconnect between, or that inconsistency, I think is a better word, that inconsistency in how things are being addressed, how things are being seen, should be part of this as well. Recommendation 6, investigate the infrastructure and make the systematic process processes transparent as related to placement in advanced placement in AP and honors classes and enrollment in the academies for each group based on race, gender, socioeconomic status, and ability groups. So we're suggesting that you continue to talk with students and families regarding their participation. We had some disagreements about that in the data. So we had some parents and some teachers who believe that all students have the exact same opportunities to be part of, to be enrolled in the academies, to be placed in AP, and so, that was their experience. But we also had some individuals who believed that students don't really understand how that works, and that teachers may or may not be referring them based on their academic achievements. The other piece to that is the CTE groups also. Also, we found that there was an overrepresentation of males in CTE and an underrepresentation of females, as well as some other racial groups. With Compass 2025 Goal 4, an exemplary diversified workforce, equity emphasis is place a priority on recruiting, retaining, and promoting a workforce representative of our diverse student population. Recommendation 7, develop essential professional development around equitable practices to include culturally responsive practices. This essential professional development will support the mind shift from mandatory or optional to priority. So create a culture around normalizing equitable practices. So we had teachers talk about that culturally responsive practices has its advantages. It allows you to be able to connect with the students in ways in which they are having their lived experiences. But the challenge behind that also is making them understand or helping them understand that you're really there for them. So there's this sense of belonging and sense of expectation that is a disconnect with the teachers and the students. So what we're recommending is that this may lead to reviewing hiring practices of minorities, mentoring, which was brought up several times in our conversations, and hiring teachers and administrators of color, measuring students' sense of belonging, and challenging institutional processes and practices that lead to inequities. One of the things that we did here in the tour of findings is that there is a high representation of individuals who believe that the teachers are not really intentionally engaging in referrals and whether it's to rigorous coursework or even to discipline intentionally based on some demographic. And that's why we are suggesting that there be training and normalized conversations to discuss what's actually happening, because the data show one thing and the conversations show one thing from what others believe is happening. Recommendation 8, develop, implement, and measure progress on a recruitment and retention plan for teachers and administrators of color that include a mentoring program. So one of the suggestions was to create a pool of teacher candidates that reflects the demographics of the student population, from which the principals can choose and engage in talent exchange partnerships with HBCUs, which are historically Black colleges and universities, teacher preparation programs, or other minority-serving institutions. In addition, we also found that in some of the conversations, individuals didn't think this was a problem, and that a focus on minority male teachers or minorities in particular was important. There were conversations about the hiring process, the interviewing process is equal across the board. But then there's this other process, there's other views that says this is not, just because it's equal doesn't make it equitable. And that's one of the things we heard quite consistently. And for Goal 5, mutually supportive partnerships. Specifically, the equity emphasis states strengthen connections and communication with families and students in most need of additional support. So our recommendation 9 is to create a more intentional process that allows families to participate in the development of an equity plan and equity-related policies and non-discrimination practices. One of the things we found from parents is that they're very busy, our students told us that their parents work, several jobs, and so they don't have time to get the information and participate actively. So our recommendation is to look at ways to go into the communities and into the schools and have conversations with people at times that they are available. One of the things that we also heard is that Virginia Beach has a lot of resources and they're always putting it out. There's a lot of effort into putting out all the resources and great information, but parents are still not taking advantage of it, accessing it, or acting upon it, and in some cases received. And so what I learned from this process in working through this is that emails and Alert Now works extremely well for the people it works well for. But for those who need to be contacted a different way, it's not working for them. So in order to get parents and families and students to be more involved in the process, then there needs to be engagement at the level at which they can participate. Recommendation 10, continue to include external stakeholder groups such as the Mayor's African American Leadership Roundtable, Special Education Advisory Committee, Equity Council, and Filipino National Historical Society in the VBCPS process. The external stakeholders also believe that Virginia Beach really cares about diversity. And for them, that meant the Title I schools, that Virginia Beach provides after-school programming, that Virginia Beach provides transportation where it's needed. They talked about the resources, the internet, and all these wonderful things that's going on that is happening in the schools. But the external stakeholders had two other concerns that we noticed. One is their definition of equity and equality was different as you move from group to group, but none of them were really clear about what Virginia Beach meant by equity. And what does that look like? And when do you know you're there? And how do you improve equity without moving toward quotas and just looking at people by one demographic as opposed to trying to make sure that opportunities and access to those opportunities are equal? Recommendation 11, reset or restructure the Equity Council as diverse stakeholders who form working groups to address each of the Compass to 2025 goals and equity emphases. When we were talking with the Equity Council, they enjoy getting the information from Virginia Beach City Public Schools. They like being able to ask the questions and show up. But one of the things that we recognize is there's a really strong opportunity here to include them more intensely. So having them come together as working groups with different expertise, and expertise can be technical expertise, or it could be community-based expertise. But having people work together in groups, they can review documents, regarding equity. They can identify strategies that can address any emerging inequities, because as you look for what's there, you get better at it, but then something pops up that you didn't even really know was going on. They can support the development of an equity plan, which we know that is on the horizon, and they can encourage stakeholders to participate in data collection efforts requiring equity work. So as you do more collection of information and experiences from people to expand, expound, and strengthen create the equity plan from the recommendations, they can help you get those people to participate so that you can have a broader array of feedback. And the last goal, goal 6, organizational effectiveness and efficiency. The equity emphasis here is to ensure equitable distribution of human, fiscal, and capital resources across the division. Recommendation 12, create an equity plan with dashboards and measures of success, which are also considered indicators, with the input of the VBCPS stakeholders to ensure accountability and measures of progress towards equity goals for the division. So we're saying that this would require to look at everything across all the equity emphases. Workforce demographics, how are people being recruited? How are they being retained? resource allocation for capital investments in the schools. We heard from some of the participants that Virginia Beach has these great and wonderful schools for certain groups, and then other schools that are in dire need of repair, and that is inequitable, that's inconsistent. Training and professional development opportunities, we talked about several types of those that could happen. Promotion practices. One of the things that came out of promotion practices is that when individuals are promoted, they tend to take with them the person whom they've worked with before or they're comfortable with. Well, when you do that, that means that if they haven't worked with you, you're not getting the same opportunity for that new promotion or to go up the ladder in that direction. And it also limits people from outside of Virginia Beach being able to apply to jobs. And that limits the diversity from experiences and potentially the diversity from other demographics. Student achievement, disciplinary outcomes and practices, we talked about those, college and career readiness, and academic program opportunities. So once this is created, finally share those dashboards and benchmarks with the stakeholders, and then gather their input and feedback on how is our Virginia Beach equity, how is equity going in Virginia Beach. So recommendation 13, prepare safe spaces for conversations regarding race and racism, gender and genderism, ability and ableism, LGBTQ+, and socioeconomic status, along with their challenges to foster respect, dignity, and belonging. What we found is that some people indicated that some people don't think their voice is being heard on one end of the spectrum or the others. Those who have had negative experiences or challenging experiences or concerns, they know that Virginia Beach hears them, but there's no follow-up to that. So we recommend that difficult conversations have to include feedback from everybody, even the people who oppose equity, believe equality is more preferable over equity, who believes racism doesn't exist. And those conversations have to become normalized if there's going to be a working together to solve solutions together. Because we've learned in all of our diversity and equity work over the years is that when you don't put the skeptics and the advocates in the same room to find out where you're coming from for the purpose of seeking an understanding and addressing the common ground of making sure all students are successful, then it continues to be parties and different groups talking among themselves instead of coming together to work as a group. And the last recommendation, continue to demonstrate the division's commitment to equity work by supporting the DEI office and add more voices to the equity work. So as I mentioned earlier, we know that there needs to be more conversations. There needs to be more intentional conversations in the communities, in the schools, with the parents and families and students and teachers. There needs to be more of that. But to continue to foster those conversations. And the thing to remember is that having the office is great, and having Dr. Parrott and Dr. Lindsay Law is great. But when you relegate this kind of work to one office, as opposed to accountability measures across the division, it loses its momentum and it becomes one person's job as opposed to our work as a division. So we're saying it was a great start when we talked about it at the beginning of the presentation. So we're saying continue your commitment by supporting that office and its work and get more people involved. So thank you for listening, and I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Parrott.
So this portion of the presentation will provide an overview of the division's next steps in moving forward from the equity assessment. I would like to first thank Dr. Gwen Lee Thomas and her team at Quality Measures LLC for conducting our equity assessment. We are indeed off to a great start here in Virginia Beach. I would also like to thank our students, our parents, our division staff, and our community members for sharing their experiences as part of our equity assessment. Thank you. Again, the equity assessment is just the beginning of our division work to examine our equitable practices and where we are in the process in removing barriers that impede full participation, access, and opportunity for any student in our school division. We will use the data from this equity assessment to continue to assess the extent where equity is present and to evaluate our school policies, procedures, and practices for the removal of barriers to access and opportunity for students, families, and staff. This is not the end, just the beginning, and we will continue to seek feedback and input from our diverse stakeholders to further inform our action planning and next steps moving forward. Sorry, you're supposed to be looking at that slide. The number one priority moving forward is to engage in more conversations across more stakeholder groups in our division, particularly with students, teachers, parents, and community members. We realize and value the collective voice of our school division so we can continue to provide valuable insight as we move our equity work forward. As part of the collective voice, we will revisit the formation of the Equity Council to ensure we leverage the skills, experiences, and the momentum of this informative body. Engaging with more stakeholders will also include communicating the findings and recommendations of this equity assessment to ensure everyone understands the data and the next steps moving forward. One way we will work to implement the recommendations of ensuring diversity of beliefs and experiences as part of this work is to develop an administrative committee comprised of internal and external stakeholders. This committee will be instrumental in the development of the multi-year equity plan. This slide here illustrates the proposed timeline in implementing the next steps that I just previously shared, beginning with organizing community sessions to share recommendations and to gather feedback. At the same time, we will formalize the administrative committee, which will begin reviewing the data collected from the equity assessment, our equity emphases as part of our strategic framework, as well as the feedback being collected from the community sessions. We anticipate to accomplish this by March of 2022. Through triangulation of these methods, the administrative team will prioritize the data and begin drafting goals, identifying action steps and strategies to target inequities that exist as part of our multi-year equity plan. Ultimately, we will present to this board a draft of the equity plan for information in early May. This will provide an opportunity for us to gain feedback from the collective board as well as provide for a community review. The final drafts of the equity plan will be presented at the Boyce Retreat in July and later for adoption during the September board meeting. The equity planning process will place a priority on stakeholder feedback and participation. It will confirm our shared understanding of the division's equity goals and priorities and next steps. It aligns with our board's adopted strategic framework along with the data collected from the equity assessment. These are all launching points, and it will result in an equity plan aligned to our shared goals and equity emphases. The number one priority throughout this process is that we as a school community move forward together as we continue to transform our teaching and learning environments into places that every student, every day, thrives and reaches their fullest potential on their pathway to success. At this time, I welcome back Dr. Gwen Lee Thomas to answer any questions you might have. We also anticipate members of Quality Measures LLC, Charmaine Charmaine Payat, and Sherelle Hendricks to join us via Zoom. So at this time, we welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Parrott and Dr. Thomas. All right. And Madam Clerk, you'll keep us posted on our Zoom participants? Okay. Anybody with a raised hand at the moment? Okay. Mrs. Manning, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I just got this packet last night, so I'm sorry if I ask questions that are in it. I only had time to glance through it. I wish we had gotten it before so that we were more educated on that. But I did skim through at least the first section of this, and I have to say I have the same concerns that I had this last summer. You mentioned that you reached out to over 100,000 people, and we only came up with 550 responses. That's a response rate of about 0.5%, and approximately 42% of those were administrators or central office staff. So my first question to you is, how can we draw conclusions on such statistically insignificant data set?
Well, first of all, this is qualitative research, not quantitative, and you can't apply the same assumptions to qualitative research that you do to quantitative research. Statistically significance is for quantitative research, not qualitative. When you conduct qualitative research, you're looking at what experiences did people have. And whoever chooses to talk to you, that's the experience you get to report. So when looking at the data, when you say, and maybe that's part of the challenge with doing this kind of work, is calling conversations data. But in the qualitative world, in social science research, qualitative data, it's considered research. So if you apply quantitative statistical analysis to a qualitative, it'll never match. It'll never make sense. Just like if you apply qualitative data analysis to quantitative data, it won't make sense because the assumptions are not the same. The analysis that you run are not the same. And so those are two separate things. Secondly, I would say that the experiences that people shared were their experiences. And regardless of if we talk to 5 people, 550, or 5,000, or 500,000, those are the experiences that were shared. And in research, you don't disregard an experience because it's not a number as you do in quantitative research. So the answer to that question is you don't justify conclusions with statistical methods assigned to quantitative data, because this wasn't that.
Okay, so I studied research in college, so I understand what you
Perfect.
said.
That's great.
However, I'm going to give you a point. For example, on page 6, it says teachers consistently indicated that VBCPS needs to continue PBIS SEL. We had 44 teachers represented out of 5,000 teachers. So I personally have spoken to probably well over 40 teachers who have a different viewpoint. So that's what I'm saying here. We don't have a representation with just 40 teachers giving us their viewpoints of exactly what is going on in our division. I understand that you're submitting the information of the people that you talk to, but I just don't think that we can draw conclusions as to what is actually going on in our district based upon that, since I have had my own conversations with teachers that have the opposite viewpoint on that. I did read in here that there were over 5,000 comments that were submitted. Can you share those with the board so that we
No.
can review those?
No,
Why not?
because that's proprietary data, and we do not share transcripts of what people said or the recordings with anyone.
It couldn't just be bullet points
No.
on what they.
No, the
Because I
summary.
see that we have some, you did share some in here, but, sorry, we're getting phone calls from Virginia Beach schools. So, so, so there's 5,000 comments out there by the public, but we don't get to know what those comments were?
No,
Summary of those comments?
you have them. And let me say this. One of the things, if you'll notice that, if you look through the report, you'll also notice that no comments have been specifically ascribed to the school board members who participated. That is because the N was too small, and it would be easy to re-identify. Human subjects research requires that you not present data in a way that an individual could be re-identified. When we interviewed everyone, we told them in the interview that your comments will be presented in aggregate only and will not be ascribed to you to be identified. And so, no, we will not do that, because if you can read those comments, then you might be able to figure out who said it.
So there are comments in here that you provided for us. How did you decide which comments you were going to share with us and which ones you weren't?
Well, we looked at the ones that were most relevant to the equity emphases that was in the comments, and those are the ones that we chose to share. And also, there were some comments that were shared that was kind of like, you know how you hear a lot of people saying stuff and that one person says it in a way that encapsulates what everybody was saying? We also use that process too. So if students were saying, teachers, we don't get support from teachers, and one student might say, well, we do get support from teachers, but then we have to say, well, students had differing opinions about the support that they received from teachers. So we don't say, and then if we choose a comment, we will choose one that encapsulates all the other comments as part of that. So that makes it more difficult to be able to go back and re-identify who said it.
Okay, how many total parents participated?
Good question. It's on.
I was trying-
78.
How many?
We had 78 in the tour of findings, and we had three in the interviews, and we had 78 in the tour of findings.
Okay, and then on recommendation 8, I don't know if you can pull that back up there. I just had a specific question on recommendation 8. Thank you, Dr. Parrott. So recommendation 8 regarding mentoring program for recruitment and retention for administrators of color. Did you do you have data? Did you find that we had a lower retention rate for? I guess this is addressed. Oh, it's teachers and administrators. Did you find that we had a lower retention rate of administrators or teachers of color?
We didn't look for it that way.
You didn't look for that?
No.
Oh, okay, because the recommendation is to have a plan for retention, so I was just wondering if we had a problem with that.
That came from the feedback from the individuals, that there needed to be a mentoring plan for teachers of color. That was from our interviews.
Okay, Ms. Woodhouse, do we have any data on that topic that we could get from HR?
We can definitely take a look at collecting such data.
Okay, thank you so much. And then just my last comment, I did see that you did a pretty thorough document review, and that's the part I didn't have time to review in this. So if it would be okay if I could follow up with questions with you after I have a chance to review that.
You would be able to follow up with Dr. Parrott.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Chairwoman Rye, please add Ms. Melnick to the queue.
Okay, so thank you, Mrs. Manning. We have Mrs. Anderson and then Mrs. Melnick.
So, going back to the number of people that you sent out the questionnaires to, apparently, I believe it was said 100,000, and we had a little over 500 participate. Is that correct?
Okay,
My question is,
well, let me address that, because that's the second time it's come up. Um, when we did the initial invitation for interviews and focus groups, using the information that we received from Virginia Beach, we invited 2,988 people to participate. Once we saw that we only had 366 responses, it's like, how can we get more feedback? So then we did the tour of findings. For the tour of findings, we invited 101, 469 individuals, which was the entire school division, to participate in the tour of findings and give us more feedback. So the short answer is, you can say, yes, we invited over 100 people and only got 55, but it was in different phases. So I think that's important to keep in mind as to people being willing to schedule a conversation versus people who were willing to just respond to a three-question questionnaire after reviewing some findings.
So my question is, were there some who just chose not to respond whatsoever, period? There were quite a few, it looks like.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
So going back and comparing, like Mrs. Manning suggested that she's spoken to over 40 people, wonder if any of those people were part of this who chose not to respond for whatever reason. So you're going by the people who responded. And,
Yes.
And a lot of times, whether people are busy, whether they just don't feel that this is a problem, or what, for whatever reason, they chose not to respond. I don't know how we can make people respond.
Well, that's why one of our recommendations is to go into the communities. All the work that I've done over the years, when it's hard to get a certain group of people to participate, you go to that group and find out why. And I've even found in my work that sometimes there's, we call them gatekeepers to a community, where when we wanted to do more work with the First Peoples or the indigenous people, we wanted to do more work with them, we had to get introduced to the community through someone they recognized.
Right.
But one of the reasons we said that is because we also found that when you go into a person's community and all they have to do is walk down the street or drive around the corner to the community center, they're more likely to show up and tell you whatever it is you want to know, than they are to, talk to someone who they don't know, or things of that nature. So there are people who didn't participate because they either didn't think it was important, I guess, or they just didn't have the kind of experience that they thought warranted this kind of conversation. We did hear from students that their parents were very busy, that's why they didn't talk to us. And that sometimes, and the other thing we kind of heard as part of, this wasn't part of the research, it was kind of like hearing from people about why they missed their appointment. They were either had a conflict, or they say Virginia Beach does this all the time and they never really do anything with the stuff they find out.
Okay, so they just didn't feel it. Some people may have felt it wasn't worthwhile. I'm a former teacher, but I've worked with teachers since 1973 here in Virginia Beach. So I can tell you for a fact, there are a lot of teachers who just, I know in my own experience, people would come to me in the building and then they would tell me things, and then they expected me to reiterate that to whomever. And because teachers are busy. I mean, really.
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
especially when you're on their time at school, they are busy. And unless they have a legitimate gripe and they're really, really upset, they don't normally participate in these types of things. But I just don't, and I've always felt like, we needed to have more teacher input on certain things. And, but just let me say that, for my experience, unless they're griping about something, it is the truth. They don't normally come to you and say, oh, everything is great, nothing's going on. But whenever there's a problem, and that's just my own experience from somebody who was a building rep who listened and tried to do what was right and ask for things that we needed. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, one of the things, that's some of the comments that we had from individuals. But another thing that came out that I didn't have time to go through because there's so much information and it's in the report. But some teachers, in order for them to feel comfortable or prioritizing this, they need I guess the word is support or approval
Right.
from their building principals.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
A lot of teachers, and this goes way back. For many, many years, teachers were afraid to come forward and complain about things. Even though now we tell teachers, we want to know how you feel. We want to know what's going on. Please tell us. They're still hesitant about it.
Yeah, one of the things we also heard about hesitancy with sharing information is that teachers, and I'm not going to say Virginia Beach teachers, so let me clarify that and say, in this work, when we want people to take a risk to share what their realities is, especially when that reality is counter to what people want the message to be,
Okay.
they have to know that they're protected.
Yes.
So if I say the truth and someone hears about what I said, will you protect me and I not lose my job? I've lost my job being vocal before. And I know the other people stayed silent because they didn't want to lose theirs.
Right.
And in this work, especially work where there's, regardless of what it is, where there's this counter conversation that can come back and cost you dearly. You know, so it's kind of like a choice between telling you what my experiences are and feeding my family.
Right. It's difficult to get teachers to stand up for what's right a lot of times, but, and then there are some who always do stand up, so, you know. But thank you for this and for doing this job, and I think Ms. Rye is out, so Ms. Melnick, you're up next.
Thank you. So after listening to all of that, I think the biggest takeaway is that the trouble in getting responses can teach us something too. Just that simply. But I think it's important for the viewing public to know that as board members, we knew about this equity assessment for quite some time, and we were given as board members multiple times to participate. And we had 4 board members that chose not to be part of that qualitative data. And so that speaks volumes too. It needs to not only be important, you know, for board members, but for everybody. And like I said, the takeaway is that this teaches us something too. But I think as a whole, I think that this has given us an amazing starting point. I liked that that it's just interwoven with our Compass to 2025. And I think that this is an amazing starting point. And I thank you for all of the work. I enjoyed participating in it. And hopefully the next time something like this comes up, we'll have better participation. But like you said, everything that we did get, the data that you did receive is allowing us to make better decisions for our students and our teachers, and I thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Melnick. Mrs. Hughes?
I need to apologize for having my back to you. I want to read my notes while I'm talking to you.
It's okay.
So I'm confused about this whole thing of shared language. Words already have definitions. What does that mean?
Because the words in and of themselves have definition, but when you create a work, what does that mean for how we will proceed and work together? So one person may say access to opportunities. We know the word access and we know the word opportunities. But what opportunities are we talking about? And what does access look like? Does access look like I know it exists? Does access says I know how to prepare myself so I can take advantage of it? And does access mean I saw it, I heard it, I understood it, and I participated? So words have their definitions. You're absolutely right. But they don't have the meaning in terms of how do we perceive in what we do from day to day and how we measure how well we're doing it. So that's why we kept using the information and the language that was already set in Virginia Beach. Because if we had, let's say we have used the educational equity of some other division, it wouldn't make sense because it wouldn't align with what you're doing unless they had the exact same language that you had. And then, so that's what we mean by shared language. Shared language is not just the definition of words, but it's what it means and how I go about doing my work every day.
Okay, I also saw in here that one of the recommendations is to remove barriers for students to be able to take advantage of opportunities. So what barriers were in place that disallowed any student from taking advantage of any program that we have offered?
One of the things as part of that recommendation with the consideration is to have those conversations with the parents and the students to identify what they believe are those barriers. Some of the ones that came out to us was some students, parents would submit applications for like an academy, and if they got denied, they didn't know why, they didn't get any feedback from that. So the barrier is lack of clarity around the process. The barrier is not, we don't want you. It was, I don't know why I was denied and I don't know what I did wrong, because in my opinion, this was a great application. We also heard some parents say that they are too busy to be involved in the schools. And they believe that as long as they're not involved in the schools, their children won't be treated fairly. I don't know what experience that person had to say that, but that is a belief out there that was provided. And some teachers even indicated that other teachers use the discipline referral as an out. So rather than deal with the student using PBIS or SEL or whatever strategies teachers have been taught to use, it's like, I don't have time for this, you gotta go. And we had another teacher who said teachers aren't paid enough to break up fights. So bringing the policeman in, let's just, they don't have time to do that. They don't. So it's kind of like there's these systematic nuances that may not come across like a bold barrier, like that counter there, but it's the way in which things are done, lack of clarity, lack of time, extremely busy. I can't apply this stuff. It's great stuff, but I don't have time to apply it. So how do we protect teachers, empower teachers, and parents, and students, so that whatever the opportunity is that that you identify as a division, it could be AP classes, it could be getting on a sports team, it could be anything. Whatever you decide is the opportunity, Then you talk to people and say, why aren't you involved? And then they identify the barriers for them. And then, as you talk to more people, you find a pattern. And then you can start addressing the pattern.
So none of these are barriers that Virginia Beach has. I mean, parents not turning in applications is not a barrier that comes from the school. And no, teachers shouldn't have to break up fights. I agree with that. I'm not sure how that's a barrier to a program for a student. I also heard several times equitable outcomes. I think that most people do realize that equal opportunity does not mean equitable outcome. You can give someone opportunity after opportunity after opportunity, and the outcome is not good because they don't do the work, or maybe don't have, maybe they would have done great here, but they applied here and don't have the aptitude there. Mm-hmm. So I don't think equitable outcomes is a good measure of anything.
Well, one of the things I proposed is that you investigate the systematic processes so that you can say that, knowing that you have taken your processes through an investigation and you can find that there are no systematic barriers and it's all on individual effort.
Okay. And as far as PBIS goes, I have never spoken to a teacher who is in favor of that, and I've spoken to a lot of teachers about it. We actually finally have people here discussing that we're having discipline issues, and it's being attributed to the shutdown, but I'm not hearing anything different now than I heard before the shutdown. Every teacher I've spoken to said when PBIS came to their school, disciplinary issues spiked. So that is a problem in and of itself. That's not really a question. It was just something that was mentioned in this. And I have to say, I mean, Ms. Melnick's comment that 4 board members did not participate, that would have brought it from 500 to 504, which still would have been statistically insignificant. And based on Miss Anderson's comments, you were talking about how you can't make people participate and that people don't speak up a lot of times unless they see a problem. So low participation actually is an important statistical point. That would mean that perhaps a lot of people don't see these problems.
I would like to, the only thing I think I want to say to that is my responsibility was to talk to people and tell you what they said. It was not to validate what you heard or your experiences or even my experiences. It was to tell you what they said. And if you have talked to 400 people and they said something different than the 550 said to me, that doesn't invalidate what the 550 said, and the 550 does not invalidate the 400. So what people, if you can get people to talk, so even though everybody didn't talk about PBIS, let me just pick that as an example, but that we didn't ask them about PBIS. We asked them about disciplinary practices. They brought up PBIS. I had to ask somebody, what is it? Because I didn't go in looking for PBIS. And so once it was explained to me, I did a little research to see what it is and say, oh, that's what they're talking about. So the people we talked to who chose to bring up PBIS, we recorded it because they said it was something good for the schools. Now, if someone thought differently, they didn't say PBIS is bad for the schools. Maybe they just didn't even talk about PBIS. But the thing I want to say, as I think my time is probably up, is that if you keep looking at this work as a statistical inference for generalization, you will not find it. It doesn't exist. And it doesn't exist with anybody's qualitative research. Everybody's voice is important. If you disagree and you haven't seen that, that's important to know. It's important to be included. And that's why we had some people who said, I do not see these problems in my schools. And then we had people who said, I see these problems in my schools. So we had to report what both groups said. And so I want to encourage you to read this according to one of your core values with an open mind, that this is somebody's reality. And if it's not a lot of people's reality, does not negate that it's somebody's reality.
And I understand that. I'm just about done. I know we're almost out of time too. Is that, and I agree, nothing I say negates what you say, just like nothing you say negates what I say.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I find very problematic about this, though, is that one, it is a very low number, and two, the only comments that were released were what supports what the people who did this assessment wanted to report. Releasing all of them and maybe redacting anything that would have been able to, identifiable, would have shown a level of transparency that would have given this more credibility to me, but that's not how it was presented.
And that's also a violation of human protections rights
Okay.
in research.
Okay, we have Mrs. Weems, and then we'll do a quick check of what happens in the formal meeting with our final presentation.
Yes, thank you. While I definitely agree that everyone's comment is as important as someone else's, and everyone's comment, whether it be perception or whatever, is their reality. But we've on the flip side of that, how many times have we been told, or that I've been told, Caroline, that's not universal, that's not systematic, we don't really do that, that's just, you're just talking to one or two people. Caroline, that doesn't really happen in special ed, you're just talking to one or two people. So we're constantly working on that, that mindset. But yet this is taking it to go against that, because the numbers are so low. Yes, that is true that whatever was said, but the numbers are so low that I just don't see how, I still don't understand the quality versus quantity kind of statements. And I guess, I mean, that's just a comment, I guess, because we're constantly being told, you know, let's look for universal problems. Let's look, you know, so we can fix them. You know, we'll tackle the one-on-one problems, but, you know, we're not going to talk about that or change policy or do whatever because that's just from the one or two people that you talk to, Carolyn. That's not happening. And so, but this seems to go totally against that. So again, the low numbers are still very problematic to me. I also had a question, as Ms. Hughes did, on page the slide 13. The goal is recommendation number 1, closely monitor achievement outcomes to determine if there are changes in equitable outcomes. So I don't really understand that, because are you looking for changes in equitable outcomes? Are we trying to get the same outcome? Because like Ms. Hughes said, that's,
This is
I
some-
don't
I'm sorry.
understand that.
Oh, okay, no problem. This is something Virginia Beach already does. We went through several reports from Dr. Beneke, presented to the school board, end-of-year discipline rates, end-of-year AP placements and gifted programs, all kinds of stuff. We looked at over 67 documents, not to do a complete thorough, you can't do that in like a couple of months, so a complete thorough, but we looked at what was in the Composite 2025, and based on what was there, we asked for documents that could demonstrate how that's going. And addressing inequities in achievements is not something we created. They just exist. Your research shows, the data from Virginia Beach shows that certain groups are doing much better on the SOLs than other groups, right? So the question is there something going on with this group or with how we do things? So asking the question is not a judgment. It's an investigation. And what you might find at the end of that investigation is it's not anything that we've done or that our systems or our processes, it's just what people are doing or not doing. And so the equity assessment was intentional, and that's the difference between doing an assessment in general and equity. If you do a disciplinary action assessment, then you're only going to look at disciplinary data. We use an equity lens to look at the data that already exists. And so the inequities in the outcomes, discipline, who gets suspended and who doesn't, who gets placed in AP for rigorous coursework, who gets accepted into the academies, all those data are just there. They've been disaggregated by gender, they've been disaggregated by economically disadvantaged, and all those things. You already have that. We didn't create that, we just looked at it. And so the thing is, there's some differences. And when you look at the pattern, the differences fall along either racial lines, student with disabilities, or gender. And that's where the differences are. So the investigation says, is there more to this? What is going on here? That's all it says. What's going on here? And you may do an investigation and not find that it's something that the system is doing.
Okay. And then when the feedback, proposed timeline for developing our equity plan, and Dr. Pear, this might be for you. So you want to have virtual town halls, maybe stakeholder feedback sessions, but that's just going to be the feedback on what the recommendations are already that was based on a qualitative, very small quantitative amount of people. But is that feedback just going to be on the recommendations, or will that feedback have the potential to change the recommendations if more people get involved? And
Mrs. Weems, yes, these are our recommendations. Quality Measures has completed this report and has provided these recommendations. What we plan to do with them is up to us. And so the goal is, as we conduct the virtual sessions, the community sessions, that we will hear from our stakeholders, because the recommendations align with our equity emphases, along with our strategic framework. So we'll be talking about all these different pieces with these various stakeholders to set our priorities moving forward. So yes, And no, we plan to get feedback from our stakeholders, and these recommendations will evolve regarding the conversations we're having and the priorities that we set as a division.
Okay, so this recommendation is just from the company, but we could add, take away?
Yes,
depending
ma'am.
on- okay,
These are
okay,
ours, and this
okay.
is our work, so we have to be comfortable with next steps moving forward.
Okay, thank you. And just
Yes.
can I just add one more thing, just a observation which has been noted? The disappointingly low number, and we talked about this at retreat, we were all disappointed at the low number of responses. It is interesting that, people do tend to be quiet when they're pleased, or things are going okay. As we have seen, we have 60 and 70 and 80 and 90 speakers to come to us every 2 weeks because people are not pleased and they have the time to voice that. So, just an interesting observation. Thank you.
So thank you both, and colleagues have been informed to follow up with you, Dr. Parrott, with more questions or comments. Thank you, Dr. Thomas. And board members, our COVID update will be item 17 in the formal meeting agenda. Now, Dr. Spence has I consulted with Dr. Spence, and any part of the COVID update that's relevant to the reversion resolution will be covered at the time that the reversion resolution comes up as an action item, because there was a request to have more feedback before voting on the resolution from two weeks ago. Okay, so yes, we'll reconvene 6 o'clock for formal meeting and workshop. We are adjourned. To be continued later. Okay.